The 85th legislature established a mandate for DIR to come up with a statewide incident response plan because of the what if it happens. It had never happened. And in the spirit of that law, we set to finding partners and getting to work. And one of those partners was TMD, one of those partners was DPS, and one of those partners was TDM, and a couple others from Homeland Security and some other places in the planning phases. We developed an incident response plan, and we were able to test that plan in small part when Jackson County got hit. And then when the real thing rolled around, we had a plan, and it had already been tested, and we were able to just go to work.
I bring in two teams. I bring our Security Operations Center folks, and I bring our Cyber Incident Response team folks. Those two come in, we're talking to DIR continuously, so they're quarterbacking, they're making sure that there's communication out to the affected entities and so forth.
Our role, succinctly, is to lead the cyber response, coordinate, prioritize, and ensure the right resources end up at the right place with the right skill sets to handle whatever we're handling at a given site.
My team is really in there to respond specifically to the incident. So my SOC reaches out to the affected individuals, whether they're counties and the DCs there, talking to them, trying to ascertain what the scope, the scale of the incident is. And they will also help interface to law enforcement, intelligence agencies, so forth, and then gather or help gather information for our CERT team. Our CERT team is actually doing investigation. They're doing analysis of evidence and so forth. While the SOC team is gathering it, handing it over, they'll store it, they'll manage the storage of that evidence, and then they'll also give that access to other law enforcement agencies as well.
At 8:36 in the morning, I got a phone call, and it was, we have a couple places around the state having some ransomware issues. And by, I want to say it was 10:30, we were up to 11 places that were having problems, and by 11 we were up to almost 20, and we ended up topping out, as everybody knows, at 22 or 23. We're talking water systems, we're talking electricity, we're talking, it could have been any kinds of things, and I don't want to say which type of system it was, but a critical public system had been impacted by this cyber attack. And that critical public system represented a risk to public safety, and that was the trigger for us.
At first, it wasn't 100% sure that it was ransomware. Maybe it was a mixture of ransomware versus other malware or DDoS attacks or whatever. But we began to paint that picture up over time, over a number of hours, as our SOC team was out calling people. And then it became really apparent that it looked like it was one attack. It looked like it was centered out of one vendor who serves those affected entities. It looked like it was happening out of a patching and updating system, one system that had communications out to all these customers of theirs. As part of that kind of chaotic first glance, it looked like it was just your standard ransomware attack. We even saw a ransomware note being delivered, electronically. And then over the next day or two, you begin to find out what the real truth is, and then things begin to make sense a little more. You begin to sharpen down on the things that are real and discard the things that are not real.
Ransomware is exactly what it sounds like. It is software built to hold somebody hostage for ransom. But instead of holding a person hostage as a traditional kidnapper would do, right? In the traditional model, if you will, the perpetrator comes, picks up a kid or an adult or someone, whatever, and sends a ransom note and says, give us X amount of money and you can have your person back in one piece. In the case of ransomware, a piece of software is used to encrypt, which means change the structure in such a way that it is recoverable but not readable. And it's only recoverable using a software key that the bad guy has.
As our CERT team really began to dive into that, along with the TMD and the FBI, it became apparent it wasn't just a single one-dimensional attack. I think they'd had some extra thought around this.
What made this different is it happened all at once. The scale, which leads to complexity, and the depth of penetration of systems. Frequently you'll get in a cyber attack you'll get a subset of systems that are impacted, but for whatever reason, not everything gets hit, right? In a lot of the places during this incident, everything got hit. And when you do that times 23, the scale and complexity of that make it a problem that is unique.
There was an initial tactical attack that was really ransomware based, and then there was another one that was happening simultaneously to try and inject and put basically privileged software that would hide on endpoints, thousands of them, and actually be out there and wait for post-attack, post-recovery. And the idea was the software on all these endpoints would call out to some IP address in the world, await instructions, and if it didn't receive instructions, just go back to sleep. And basically, the sleeper software was going to, probably was going to sit out there for months, if not years, so that they could launch new attacks into the future.
No two cyber attacks and no two incident responses are ever exactly the same, but in this regard, that makes it truly unique.
We don't think it was an accident that it happened to a law enforcement network. I think that was pretty plain. I mean, how do you pick one vendor, a little tiny company who mostly has law enforcement customers in multiple states? How do you pick that one? Why did you pick that one? That it had to be not by mistake.
I'm not sure that any of the specific folks who were actually impacted were an intended target because of who they were, so much as they were intended because the bad guys were trying to get paid.
They asked for a chunky bit of money. They didn't get paid, of course, but they were absolutely going to ask for payment to fund their operations, obviously, and that's also a good way to continue that whole thread so that they can attack others. So if they get paid, they can fund other attacks on other individuals as well.
It's less of a calculated attack seeking specifically these targets than it is a target-rich environment when you're dealing with lots and lots of cities across the country, not just here in Texas, but there's a story in the paper every day about a different ransomware attack somewhere in the country, right? And these, the bad guys are trying to get paid.
There could be connections to nation-state stuff behind this as well, at least tangentially. So I definitely don't think it was your average random ransomware attack.
They saw an opportunity to hit a lot of folks at one time, and they took it, and they were trying to get paid.
We began to interface very much more closely with law enforcement because they've got a criminal investigation, or they may have a criminal investigation going on. So there needs to be preservation of evidence that has to occur, that has to take primacy.
Many places don't even have paper backup solutions anymore. They don't have a method to go back to business as usual 35 years ago. It just doesn't exist. Everything's digital. And so there's two things going through their mind. One, they can't help the citizen that just walked through the door who needs help with whatever it is. It could be something simple, or it could be something life-changing and complex.
Think about a 911 system that gets encrypted, that basically goes, basically becomes nothing more than a fancy paperweight.
There's a statutory requirement for video cameras to be running during policing. If the system is down that downloads that footage, once your hard drive fills up in the car, you're done. You are not policing anymore.
What has to happen is in those cars, they're connected to PCs. They have to take those out, download them to a system that's at their police department, and that's used as evidence. Well, if that gets tainted or if it gets basically encrypted and it's not usable, then all those crimes, all those potential crimes, alleged crimes, have to be pretty much, or they're at least at risk of being thrown out.
Jackson County, when they got hit, all of their systems all the way down to the library were hit. They can't even check out a library book.
What if they lost all of your records for you paying water? That actually happened in a couple of towns where not only was the customer records were they encrypted, but all the backups, all the history of all their payments got encrypted as well, so they had nothing. They basically had to start over as if they were a brand new town and nothing was there.
And so helplessness, inability to conduct business, and a massive sense of frustration are what is being experienced on the ground, along with some potentially downstream crippling economic effects of not being able to conduct business, because there's a lot of private sector transactions like real estate that require government interaction, and that government interaction is completely unavailable in the event of a full-scale cyber attack.
There were some systems that could not be patched, could not be updated, because they were running things like SCADA systems that worked a water system. So you couldn't really use the latest Windows 10 system that had the latest operating system patches and the latest malware updates. A number of them also had connected backups. And what I mean by that is they were backing up like they were supposed to do. They were backing up their systems, but they were leaving them attached. If you think about it, a computer, on a desktop with a connected hard drive, or if you think about it from a server standpoint, something similar to that, where it's connected and you can see it as if it's another drive. Ransomware was sophisticated enough to say, oh, well, I'm gonna encrypt everything on this machine here, but I'm also gonna encrypt everything that's connected to it as well. And so we ended up with some townships that had, billing systems and things like that for garbage and water and light and so forth that were getting encrypted because their backups that they were doing religiously, but it was all connected, so it was bricking everything. So even though they had backed up, they were basically helpless because even their backups were encrypted.
There are all kinds of problems that people will never ever think of until it happens to them, and we're working on some checklists to make sure that those are considered in the planning processes.
We saw a very similar attack right after, I think it was in South Dakota, by the same writers of the same malware, same ransomware. And so one of the other things that we're working on really closely is with other states.
This incident we identified, we'd never included our federal partners in our planning process. We'd only worked with our state people. Nobody in the process thought maybe we should bring in somebody from Federal Homeland Security. Maybe we should talk to how we're going to work this with the FBI. We certainly could have sped things up by making sure that their concerns, their workflows, their processes, and their needs were considered in the planning process. Additionally, we had a whole lot of people looking for information that we could not provide. We didn't have a method or means to provide that information at the time, and so we're working on building an infrastructure to get the word out to folks who are not affected and let them know that yes, there's something you can do to help make sure you're not affected, or no, there's nothing you can do, continue to follow best practices. We didn't have a way to tell everybody if we haven't called you, you're fine.
We are actually in the midst of have started an information sharing and analysis organization that will be statewide in coordination with DIR that will also be able to message out to everybody across Texas. Ours is really going to be more aligned with counties and cities and so forth, communicating to them. DR will have their own ISAL that's completely wrapped around state agencies. So but between the two ISAL organizations, we'll be able to communicate very rapidly anytime there's an incident or anytime that we think there's a potential for an incident, that we tell people, we want you to do X, Y, and Z to get ready for this.
There are people across the state at many different agencies with what we call eyes on glass every single day, monitoring, waiting, and watching, listening to the phone, and standing ready to support Texans wherever they are, at whatever level of government, to assist in getting them back to good when they are hit. Because for many of us, just like a flat tire, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we want to make sure that everybody knows what to do when it happens.
When a ransomware attack occurs, a number of the entities out there, we know they have insurance on this. The insurance companies are not always aligned with where we think it should be. So theirs is, well, let's help our client get back up and going as soon as possible. And if necessary, we'll pay the ransom and get it unencrypted, because we think that the cost of recovering is much higher than just paying the ransom. We don't think that's a good idea at all. We're very, very hopeful that there's going to be law that says, no, you're not going to pay that. So that's another policy of ours. No, we're not paying any ransom. If you do your job right, if you keep those backups offline and they're complete, then yeah, you're going to have some disruption, but you're not going to be basically out of business.
In the 86th legislature, the legislature recognized the need, and the governor agreed that there is a need for additional security controls on sensitive systems and data.
A lot of our stuff, especially on the network side, is artificial intelligence based, behavioral monitoring. So if it normally thinks that these two endpoints talking to each other may be okay, we can lower the bar and have it actually say, wait a minute, let's investigate that conversation or that behavior between these two endpoints or between these two IP addresses a little more closely. We used to have to look at a machine and say, oh, it's infected. Let's burn it down. Let's re-image it and restart and give them like a brand new PC. We have some relationships with some vendors that are extremely good at allowing us to reach down into a machine, even in memory, lock up a process that's running, that's doing active encryption, stop it in the midst of it, take a snapshot of everything that's going on so that law enforcement can have that, and then fix that problem on the fly without interrupting their operation.
There are innumerable new threats every day, and what Texas can do in the future is be ready to address those threats. And I think that we are well positioned to do so as a state, much more so than many places, much more so than many private sector places, because we communally recognize the need to secure ourselves and our data. And I think there's much more of a culture, which is what it comes down to, of security already in Texas than there is in a lot of other places. And so I don't think that we're going to have the same level of struggle that a lot of other places will in planning for the future.
We've seen some very small places get hit with ransomware, and their insurance company, and the bad guys know that they're insured. They know that their insurance companies are likely to pay. They know that they basically can hold that entity in a stranglehold. So my point is, just observe some good, sound cyber hygiene. Have a good strategy. It doesn't take a huge amount of time or effort. Work with some experts in the field. One of the things that we're seeing among counties and among other entities is sharing experts in this field. And A&M's more than willing to share what we've seen out there and to help counties, cities, any agencies out there as well. But definitely good cyber hygiene is a lot less expensive than having a ransomware attack or even a malware attack where it's just virus, running amok all over your network.
Start with education. Go get an education program. If you're a government entity in the state of Texas, now as a result of the 86th legislature, every single government employee with access to a government computer system has to take cybersecurity awareness training. Start there. Another place to start would be incident response planning. You don't know what you don't know, so start building a plan. You will find the answers, and wherever you don't have an answer is where you need to start looking. And you can get guidance for how to begin that process by downloading the DIR Incident Response Redbook, which is a template for building out an incident response plan. And it was specifically designed in such a way that it is accessible to the smallest and largest organizations and will help provide the foundations of an incident response plan. It's highly tailorable to make sure that it meets that large agency complexity need while still being accessible to that small, tiny town or tiny agency. Start there.
The great thing is we actually have a division that does a lot of teaching around the state and actually out beyond the borders of Texas called TEACS. They've developed a number of different courses that are short but are very pointed at helping emergency managers as well as just county and city people that are officials that are responsible for cybersecurity and for the operation of these townships.
Another place to start would be to just make sure that everybody is not keeping their password on a Post-it note under their keyboard. Just go walk through your office building and see how many passwords are on sticky notes. Take those down and tell people why they can't do that anymore. We say, oh, so-and-so clicked the bad link, it's their fault. We always forget that there's a bad guy who made a bad link. We always forget that there's a bad guy who took advantage of that open port, and that there's a bad guy looking to do bad things, and that every single person is a victim. Every single organization is a victim. We don't look at somebody whose house burns down and say, well, it had to be your fault. We don't look at somebody who is in a car accident and immediately say, well, obviously you're to blame because you're super negligent. And that's another good place to start, is just investigate your culture and see where it lands on the cyber side. The state cybersecurity strategic plan offers 5 different ways to go about aligning your cybersecurity program. And if you don't have one, go about building your cybersecurity program. The first is engagement. Culture starts at the top, and engagement is at the executive level. You have to engage with your executives and get support. Once you have that, you have to look at tooling. Tooling is the second plank of the state cybersecurity strategic plan. It's the penetration testing engine, it's the scanning engine, it's the IDS, IPS, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system. It's all those fancy cyber things you hear about on NCIS and other places, right? Except used properly. It doesn't mean you buy a tool. It means you look at the tools you have. There's tons of free tools. There's tons of tools in everybody's environment. We have a bad habit of just buying new tools instead of meeting our needs. Once you have engagement and some tools, you need people to run those tools. Staffing is the third plank of the state cybersecurity strategic plan. You need people to run it. People includes retaining, hiring, training. You have to train your people to use those tools to meet the business objectives of the executives. Once you have those first 3 things, you can meet the 4th objective of the state cybersecurity strategic plan, which means you're able to respond to problems. You're able to do good things when bad things happen. And last but not least is outreach. You have a program now. You need outreach. You need to make sure that you're not just talking to your employees, you're talking all the way to your employees' families. Your people are taking it home and teaching their kids why they can't use mom and dad's work laptop, why they can't just do whatever they want on a cell phone because it has consequences. And if you can do all those things, start by reading that plan, you'll have a program at the end.
This is our first real cyber incident that TDM and the governor's office has been involved in. It went a whole total of 8 days. I think it went extremely well, but I think we can expect in the future that those attacks are going to become more sophisticated, that we need to make sure that we practice and that we get ready for that next series of attacks.
During the August incident, we had an outpouring of offers of support, some of which we were able to accept, others of which for various reasons we were not. But it just felt good to know how many different companies, how many different Texans were ready and willing to reach out and help their fellow Texans.
One of the things that we're always concerned about is there going to be a multi-event attack? So instead of 23 entities affected and it's really just one attack, what if it's multiple attacks on 50 counties or 100 counties? That's a big deal. What if it's on a big city that's spread out all over the place, like what happened in New Orleans? Those are the things that we got to really worry over and be prepared for.
I see the future of Texas security, cybersecurity, information security as collaborative. It is a team sport, and it is a full contact team sport. And more Texas at large, Texans at large are coming to realize that, and that we are not going to be ready to win the game if we're not one team.
We're seen at the federal level and among the states as leaders. I think we need to make sure that we stay there and that we provide good leadership in cyber.